Hello everyone, and once again I'm following up a video called Fantastic Exposure Factors and how to determine them. This is just a little bit of audio. What I want to talk about is when we was using, say, the exposure factors or the exposure factors that a radiographer can adjust, so they can adjust the KVP, they can adjust the MAS, they can adjust the time. And all of these things have a different impact on image quality. And we won't talk about image quality in too much detail because it can go very, very detailed. And so we're going to talk about what each thing, how it affects an image. KVP. KVP, if you remember, X-rays are photons. And you have to think about this as, say, a bullet is a good example. So you have a medium, a body part that you have to penetrate. So when an object is passing through something, you have to be able to penetrate that object. And because the laws of physics still apply, as an object passes through something, it deposits energy into it. That's why bullets kill people, because energy is deposited in the thing that you shoot. It's kind of the same thing with an X-ray photon. If an X-ray photon is very energetic, then it's easily able to pass through, and it deposits a less amount of energy inside the medium that it's passing through. Or if it, for example, conversely, if it's a low energy X-ray photon, then it's not going to penetrate and it's going to either be absorbed in the skin, or it's going to be absorbed a little bit lower down in the body, or a little bit, less through the body. And that's what KVP affects. So it affects how energetic it is. But once it passes through, it's attenuated, it absorbs a given amount of radiation for the matter that it's passing through. And it generates contrast as well. So that's the differentiation between air, soft tissue, and bone. The higher the KVP, the more contrast you have. And it seems counterintuitive. And for some reason, as a student, I could not wrap my head around this whatsoever. For whatever reason, I don't know why. But it kind of works a bit counterintuitively. Then we move on to MA. MA is the current that's applied across an X-ray tube. You don't need to worry exactly too much. But the current is the amount of rays. So you could have rays with a peak kilovoltage potential of 70 kVp and 1 MAS. 1 MAS, very little radiation. It's a product of current over time, so it's 1 milliamp second. And the MA is directly proportional to how black a film is, or the amount of radiation that is produced from an X-ray tube. So if you have 70 and 40 MA, you've got a hell of a lot more rays. And the way to tell if a film has been hit by radiation is that it's black. So if you've got a hell of a lot of radiation, the film's going to be very black. And so it affects density. When we refer to density, it means how dark an image is. And that's what density means. Now, time, I was saying about MAS is a product of current over time. So it's current divided by time, or current times time. And what that means is how long the tube is active for, how long that tube is on to create that image. Now, if you think in terms of photography, I know we're kind of going a little bit flip side here, but when you're trying to take a photograph of motion, that's very, very quick motion, you want a fast shutter speed, 1/1000th of a second, or something like that. Now, if you think of it in terms of MAS, if you're trying to capture an object that's moving quite quickly or somebody's shaking, then you're going to want a very, very fast exposure time. So you can give lots of MAS over a shorter period of time. So you'd have to increase the overall total maximum MA output. Or you could give, which is not always desirable, but sometimes is. I personally still like to do it. And that is to give, say, the same MAS, so 36 MA, but over 2 seconds. And it feels like an absolute eternity when the X-ray tube is turned on. But the time contributes to sharpness or unsharpness. And we can bend that to our advantage as radiographers. Now, how do we use time and bend it to our will? We command time. No, we don't. And, well, as radiographers, we can do. Particularly useful if you're still in a CR situation and or have a DR kit where you can adjust how long the detector is active for. Most DR kit, well, at least the DR kit that we use, is active for a maximum of, I think, about 500 milliseconds, so about half a second. And I still like to do what's called a breathing exposure. You may not have learnt about that just yet, but a breathing exposure is where you take an image of the thoracic spine and you'll have structures in the way that are not desirable. You don't want to see the ribs, really. You don't want to see the lungs. And so when you're breathing, the thoracic cavity is expanding and contracting, and your intercostal muscles expanding and contracting, and your lungs are thus expanding and contracting. And then what happens is, well, how do you think, well, how do we get rid of those structures? Well, the spine doesn't really move that much during breathing motion. So hold on a minute. Knowing that the spine doesn't move that much during a breathing motion means that you can blur out the structures because they're in motion and X-rays are still active. The X-ray detector is still receiving radiation during that movement, but they're going to be unsharp, whereas the bony structures in the thoracic spine are going to be very sharp. And that image will be displayed in the previous talk that I did. But hopefully, if you listen to this as a little audio bite, it'll help clarify the fantastic exposure factors and how to determine them. And you can probably look at a little bit more information on this online. And if you like, I'll follow this video up again, but with more of a visual aid. But this is just to clarify some points that I made in the fantastic exposure factors and how to determine them video. So I hope you enjoyed this little audio snippet and enjoyed the video of me playing Fallout 4 or Half-Life 2. Whichever one I've included. I've included it because I like video games, and one of the cool things about video games is that you can learn from your mistakes quite easily because it has no consequences. Now, unless you're playing a game that has permadeath, then it does have consequences because you have to restart the game over and over and over again. Now, one of the cool things about video games is that your character can die, but you reload from your last save. And essentially, if you look at it, you've never actually died in the video game because you learnt from your mistakes and you reload from your last save point, your last checkpoint, and then play the game again, realize what you learned and what you did wrong, and then you come to a conclusion. And so I'm currently playing Half-Life 2. I've been playing Half-Life 2 for a hell of a long time, and I'm quite terrible at it. But I've been learning a lot about Half-Life 2, as well as the game physics engine, getting used to it and everything. I'm getting a lot better. So I'm going to include some time-lapse of me playing Half-Life 2, bearing in mind that this has been in my Steam library since the beginning of Steam Time. Steam Time is not such a thing, but I refer to it as the date when I got Steam, the video game platform for PC. So I'm going to include that in these videos, and I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all the usual stuff, but really people don't need reminders about that. If you're going to subscribe, you're going to subscribe. If you're not, you're not. Anyway.